in the early 2000s, things started to change a lot in newsrooms. So we started having to deal with publishing things on the internet. We were making blog posts, shooting video. The Web 2.0 tools were coming in. So things started to change in newsrooms. And I was in a production role at that time on the interactive desk of a big international paper. And so we were trying things out. But I suppose what I started to realise was that we were just putting up what we were making for the newspaper and putting it on the internet with some links. We weren't really changing like our practice very much. I eventually left newspapers and I ended up in a teaching role at a university, and so the opportunity came for me to start doing some more study. So I started to look at that kind of idea, that how could we push journalism in a new direction. So I started looking into the literature about journalism practice and journalism production, and it's fairly consistent that journalism hasn't exploited new technology in any real meaningful way. And that's for a bunch of reasons. Some of it is about the skill set of practitioners, but a lot of it's cultural as well. And the fact that our ideas about the audience are very rigid. We see them as consumers and a passive receiver rather than someone who's involved in the production of news and information. So I started thinking about a very basic technology, hypertext, and how that might be used, how were we using it and how could it be used. And so I started investigating the literature around that and the research, and not in journalism but in computer science and literature. And suddenly there's all these possibilities. Hypertext could be used to remediate print. It could enable readers to control stories in ways that weren't intended by the author. You could vary storylines, vary plot. You could enable readers or stories to be told from multiple points of view. You could make storytelling more transparent. But none of these things had really been experimented with or used in journalism. I started thinking about, well, how could we design a way of telling a story that exploited some of these possibilities? And so the idea that came about was for a three-dimensional cube on which you could tell a story from multiple points of view. You could allow readers to interact with it physically, because at that point it was an iPad prototype. So you could play with it physically and control the narrative in some way. I started out with a concept. I used a design approach to generate the idea and prototype. So low fidelity prototype with blocks of wood, and then I worked with a developer to kind of bring that concept to a digital prototype that I could push out and test, get people to use it, give me some feedback, and I interviewed them about their experience of it and what they thought about the interface, and that gave me some really valuable insights. For example, they thought it was fun, and that's like not something that we associate with news or journalism in any way. Our news values are all very serious, you know. But and that tactility, that gave them a sense of ownership and control, which we don't have in the consumption of news. And then I won an innovation grant, which gave me some money to be able to develop that prototype a little bit further, to the point now that where there is a beta version, I suppose, which is a web-based version, for various reasons, but so that's available on the internet. If we experimented, if we took a big idea and tried it out to see what might be possible, and I suppose the result of that is a thing that doesn't look like a normal news story or newspaper. In terms of uptake, people using it, that's been limited. People have used it and played around with it, and people like the idea of it, but I think it needs refining in terms of the design. It still is clunky to use, and I suppose what we've got is what was possible with the resources and time and funds that I had available. And an error I probably made early on was that when that beta came out, I put it behind it was a closed beta, because I was trying to mitigate any kind of risk. And I still don't want to get sued, or anything like that. So I limited that. So it meant that probably some momentum that I would have had early on to build a user base, I undermined because of trying to balance those two things. Well, I think actually the most important outcome from the project is to show the value of this kind of design-led approach to generating new ideas for journalism, which obviously we know is under quite a lot of pressure from various fronts. So I think that kind of experimental, user-focused way of generating ideas, trying them out and considering new possibilities, and also the idea that you can put something out there and it doesn't have to be perfect, and you can try it and bring it back, and what you learn from that you can then apply to something else. I think that's actually probably the most valuable output. The News Cube is one idea, but technologies give us all kinds of possibilities for new forms of interaction and engagement with technologies and information. So I'd like to take those skills and that process and apply it to a different problem. Well, I think what's a really important lesson is that it's all right to try things out, and that it's really important to experiment. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work initially, and the whole process of doing something and trying it out is a learning experience. I think you shouldn't just accept that just because the way something is at the moment in an organisation or a business is the only way it could be or should be, and you might be able to get a left field idea that might help create some change in that organisation or in society.